maybe I'm taking things on faith from people who I've heard before and I trust for some reason. And of course the question is, do you have faith in that person or do you have hope in them? In other words, have you studied their backgrounds? When you get onto an airplane, any of you guys ever fly? Nobody here's ever flown before? Okay, why do I have to ask that twice? You know, did you all of a sudden fly in the last 3 seconds since I answered the first time? That's the first time? When you got on the plane, did you walk up to the pilot and check his credentials? Did you ask him a bunch of questions to make sure he could fly? No, you had that cool jacket on, right? And that silly hat with the wings, so you're like, oh, this person looks official. I'm sure they can fly a plane. You have a lot of hope, or maybe faith, because maybe you're looking at the airline, maybe you flew on Delta Airlines, and you haven't heard about an airplane crash in a while from Delta, so maybe you got good reason to believe that they're not going to crash, and they hired someone who knows what they're doing. So maybe there's some faith that's there. My point is that we underestimate this thing a lot, or we overstate it, depending on our context with it. And so, must be me. So maybe there's an element of faith that's going on there, or an element of wishing. Who knows? But the way that most of us wish, though, he's saying that we confuse the desire for something with its probability. In other words, when we desire something so much, we're like, oh, I really hope this happens. I want it. That because we want it, we think, therefore, it's going to be probable. It's going to be likely. And so, like, wow, I really hope that I pass this test. Well, did you study for it? No. Did you pay attention in class? No. Teacher was talking. I had my AirPods in. Oh, well, did you read at least along with the class? No, none of that. Well, okay, I guess in the weakest version, then you hope for it, and then therefore you desire a passing grade. But there are various, forms of desire. Let's say earlier, someone said fortune. So let's say you hope for fortune. You can desire it, and you can just kind of sit there and imagine what it would be like to be rich, and then just hope that all of a sudden a big bag of money is going to fall out of the sky and land in your lap. Or you can do a little bit of something, and you can invest $1 and go get a lottery ticket, and that's a little bit more. But what other kinds of things can a person do if they desire fortune? Yeah. Invest in stocks. In order to do that, you might say, well, I have to have money to do that. Yeah, so that means that you have to get a job. That means you have to put your life into something. And we don't oftentimes think of that, of jobs that way. But for every hour that you're spending at work, that's 1 hour that you're not spending someplace else. That's why when we steal things from people, it's so much bigger than just like, someone steals like, whatever, like I don't know, a pair of shoes, and you're like, oh, it's just $100. Yeah, how many hours did you have to work to get that $100? Because that's what it represents. If you're making $20 an hour, let's say, then you had to work 5 hours. That's 5 hours of your life that you're never going to get back. So essentially, someone didn't. Yeah, they stole shoes from you, but they stole more than that. They stole life from you. 5 hours of your life away from you. We don't really think of it that way. We think like, money's replaceable. I'm sorry, anything that gets stolen is replaceable. Money's no big deal. But the same token will say, but thank goodness you're alive, because you can't replace life. Well, that's exactly what those two things are. Yeah, you can't replace somebody once they're dead, but you can, the same is true about something that gets stolen. You can't get those 5 hours back that you put into buying that thing, or whatever it was. So maybe if we thought about our lives that way, we'd be more careful about how we spent our money. Because then you'd realize, am I willing to trade 5 hours of my lifetime for this pair of shoes? And the answer to that question very well might be yes, and that's fine. But now, if instead you say, no, I'm not willing to do that, so now I've got this $100, so what can I do with it? Well, now if you take that and you invest it, then what that means is you've done something deeper. You've sacrificed. You've sacrificed this pair of shoes, which you could have right now. And you could walk out of the store and you could wear them tomorrow. You can have them right now. Or you can take this amount of money, which is in your hand, and put it someplace else, and then never see it again for years down the road. In other words, you have to be able to conceptualize the fact that you're going to be able to get something out of that years from now. So that means that at your age right now, you have to be able to conceptualize 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And you have to be able to conceptualize what money is going to be worth at that point. And then to make any real money, you're going to have to do this many, many times. It isn't just going to be a one-time thing where you're going to take $100 and then have $1 million in a few years. You're going to have to sacrifice constantly to be able to come up with enough money to invest it such that you're going to be able to get some real return on that. And again, that whole time that you're doing that, that's 5 hours of your life, 5 hours of your life, 5 hours, and that can add up, of course, to be quite a bit. And so if that's the case, and we really thought of it that way, we might be more careful with the ways in which we spend money or invest money. Again, for better or worse, we might be better off. In fact, we might be better off for that considering how we spend our time constantly. And think about how much time we spend on things that we'll never get back. Time that could have been invested, maybe in getting something out of it. Who knows? And so, in that case here, yeah, we're kind of hoping that we're going to get something out of it, but there's something more that's there. There's a faith that's playing out there. Because hopefully you don't just take all of your money and go, all right, I have sacrificed. I've saved up this $1,000 or whatever. And so now I'm going to go ahead and buy 1,000 lottery tickets. And let's see what happens. Hopefully that isn't the way that you invest it. Hopefully you do some research and you study and you figure out how best to do that. And of course, in order for you to study it and figure out how best to do that, you can add more time in there as well, because it's more of your life that you're putting into it, that you're not doing something else. So with that being the case, it isn't so much a hope that that's going to pan out for you. It's more of a faith. It's the evidence. It's the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This is the essence of faith. And so in this case here, he's saying oftentimes people confuse it with the desire. Just because I want it really, really badly, that means it's probably going to happen. And he's saying it's probably not true. It's probably not true. What will actually make things work out is not a hope or a wish for something, but the actual doing of it to make it work out. And it's interesting because it's such an obvious point to a lot of us, but it's also something that we miss a lot when we approach life. And I mean, not just academically. Like if I ask you to write an essay about how best to achieve your goals, I bet most of us could write out some really wonderful plans about how to do it. And that indicates that we know how to do it. And I think that most of us probably do know how to do it. But how to discipline ourselves so that we actually do it, that's really difficult. That's really difficult. And it's because of this thing of sacrifice. Like if, for example, going back to the idea of making a fortune, is it possible? Yes. How much work has to go into it, though? Yes, good answer. No answer, because we don't know. Because you're hoping that if you put 50, 60 hours into it, that it's going to pan out. But you're not really hoping, you kind of have faith in it. What are you saying?
It's spent a lot of hours.
A lot, yeah, probably. Probably a lot. Probably a lot. And the thing is, we don't really know how much, we just know it's a lot. It's going to be like a lotto. A lotto is like a little, but it's a lot. So maybe it's way more than we're willing to weigh the risks. And the reason I mention that is because you have to figure out that your life, you've got 24 hours, and that's it. And then however many you're going to sleep, let's say that you're going to sleep 6 hours a night. So that leaves you now with how many hours to work? 18 hours out of the day. And then you have to subtract a little bit back, because you got to go to the bathroom sometimes. Even if you're eating, you can still work while you're eating. But now let's say that you're going to commit yourself to working 18 hours a day, or you've got 18 hours a day of your life of consciousness, let's say. Now, how much of that are you going to spend in eating?
An hour.
An hour. So you're going to eat for 1 hour, let's say. Okay, and how much time of that are you going to spend in working?
8.
8 hours working, okay. So that leaves us 9 hours. What are we going to do with our other 9 hours?
Watch TV.
9 hours of television.
Oh.
The numbers aren't super important right now. The concept is what's important right now. So now, imagine if we if we were to reorient this and go, okay, so we're still going to eat for 1 hour, let's say, and then rather than working for 8 hours, imagine if we're going to increase that now to, I don't know, 11 hours of working. And then that means that we're going to have to cut back on our television by 3 hours, so that's 6 hours of television. My point is that because you've only got a certain number of hours, you have to shift around what your priorities are going to be. Now, you also include into this not just eating, working, and television entertainment. Now start to work into this family. Now work into this, I don't know, what else would you need to do with life? I don't know.
Pushing all your friends.
Was that friends? Yeah, family, friends. And then you start to realize, you know, if you're going to go to school, you guys are going to go be in college after that, maybe school. And so now you start to think about how many things in your life are pulling you in different directions. And you can't give them all the time that you need to be an expert in all of them. In other words, if you had those 18 hours a day extra, imagine if you put all 18 hours into working, what you could accomplish. Now, what would happen if you put those 18 hours into working? No time for family, no time for friends, no time for school, no time for leisure. Your work life, you'd be kicking ass in your work life, guaranteed. You'd be excelling way past everybody else at wherever you're working. But you wouldn't have any family, and you wouldn't have any friends. In fact, they would be, you'd probably have family giving you a lot of grief about how you're always working. And you wouldn't have an opportunity to go to school. So now you have to reorient and go, okay, well, I can't do 18 hours at work. But so maybe I can push it to 10 so that everybody else is doing 8. I push it 2 more hours, so I'm doing 25% more than everybody else. Okay. But then that also, so now I can commit more time to my family. But when you commit to your family, that means you're not committing it to your friends. And if you are committing it to your family and friends, you're not committing it to school. My point is that when we talk about how it is that we can orient our lives, you have to do that kind of mathematical calculation in it. A lot of us don't do it that way. A lot of us are just kind of like, well, we'll just see where the day takes us. Which there's something to be said for that, but I wonder how often during the day you stop and go, wait, I know I'm having fun with my friends, but I really need to get my responsibilities sorted out. I really need to focus on this right now. Or how many of us kind of like, oh shit, I have an essay due tomorrow. I have to do this right now. Hurry up. I'll be back in a couple of hours. Let me just go do this real quick and I'll come back. I don't know how many of you guys ever work on school and you go like, let me go see my friends real quick. I'll be right back. And you rush back to school. That can tell you kind of where our priorities lie. And it's not a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a thing. So now when you look at a person like Elon Musk, let's say, richest person in the world, how much time do you suppose he spends on eating every day? Probably very little. Probably very little. Every time he eats, he's probably working. Even if he has lunch, he's probably having lunch with people to discuss business stuff. So even over lunch, they're still working. And then, how much time do you suppose he spends on television? Zero. A lot of time on Twitter, though, as I understand it. I understand he tweets quite a bit. So there's something that's there. But now the interesting thing, his family. Any of you guys know about his family life?
No.
He's got 7 kids. Yeah, exactly. And they don't seem to like him very much. One of them actually, a few weeks ago, she changed her name, her last name, because she didn't want to have any connection to him at all. Not even his name. So that's how much she hates him. So he has very little relationship with any of his children. Why? Because all that time is going up here into working. So now the idea is that, therefore, is that if you want to be Elon Musk, if you want to compete at that level, all of this stuff has to go away. Now that doesn't mean you can't have children, it just means you can't have a relationship with them. That doesn't mean that you can't have a spouse, it just means you can't have much of a relationship with them. Which is why he's had several relationships. I think he's been married once or twice and didn't work out. Because everything ends up going up into there. Because the truth of the matter of life is that you can't have it all. When we think like, I can have, no, you can't have it all. You have to prioritize. You have to decide what you want to have. What's the most important thing to you? And then you can pour yourself entirely into that. Any of these things that you put yourself into haphazardly or halfway into, you're going to get halfway results out of, just like with our investments. If you invest $10,000, yeah, you'll get an investment on it, but let's say you invested $20,000. Well, you're going to get less, obviously, with the $10,000 than you will with the $20,000. You're going to get less with the 8 hours than you would have with the 10 hours. But you're also going to get less out of the 2 hours than you would have with the 4 hours. All of life is this kind of competing for your time and your resources. And the money, yeah, you can earn more money, sure, but you can't get the time back. And that's the thing that's difficult for us to kind of conceptualize. Because we think of time as like, oh, there's always tomorrow. And then tomorrow is always the busiest day of the week, isn't it? Because that's when we do everything. Tomorrow, 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 tomorrow. And yet if you maximize today, then you can get a heck of a lot out of it. But that's the decision you have to make. That's why many of us, if you looked at Elon Musk's life, and not just at what he had, what he owns material-wise, but if you had to ask him, if you had to follow him around and do his day for 1 day, 2 days, 10 days, 20 days, I wonder how many of us would be able to keep up with it. I think of Jack Dorsey, if you guys know who that is. He was one of the founders of Twitter. He was the CEO until he stepped down, like, I think a year ago or so as the CEO. The guy eats once a day, and he eats the exact same thing every day. Chicken and rice. Chicken and vegetables. I think it's chicken and vegetables. Chicken and vegetables or chicken and rice, one of the two. And on weekends, he fasts. He doesn't eat Saturday or Sunday. He only eats Monday through Friday, and he eats 1 meal a day. Why? Because it's a waste of time. That's what he says. It's a waste of time. He doesn't eat it on the weekends because he's not having to be as busy, because he's still busy, but not as busy because it's the weekend. So he doesn't have to eat. But to fuel himself, he eats once a day. And he walks to work every day. I think it was 4 or 5 miles to and from work every day. He walks it. And that's because he uses that time not to think, true, but mostly to respond to email and stuff like that. The guy has 0 downtime. And that's what it takes to perform at that level. And yet most of us, we don't want that. I don't know if anybody in here wants that kind of a life. I don't know. But I mean, if you do, it's there. But you can't just hope for it, because it's not probably going to happen. You have to do something. You have to invest to get there. It's just a hard thing to discipline ourselves to do. I guess an easy way of thinking of it is, anybody in here want Elon Musk's money? I can't be the only one. Anybody in here want Elon Musk's life of work? Maybe. I'd try it and see how it works. But probably not. Probably not. So, anyway, Arthur Schopenhauer, very happy man, as you can see. Imagine, yeah, that's probably the picture I have of him that's closest to him smiling. He still has more hair than me. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?